Welcome back, everyone. In this chapter, we're going to be talking about labor unions. We'll begin chapter 10 with just a short introduction and a quick look at why people join unions. Now, we may think that unions are a little bit outdated, but after the big longshoreman strike or potential strike just a few months before you're watching this lecture, it's still something that we have to deal with in some situations. There are still quite a few industries where unionization is still prevalent. So we can look at unions just like we did look at individual workers and look at firms. Now, unions are comprised of people, typically many people, but we can analyze them just like we analyze firms. So the unions act in furtherance of their goals, which is the goals of their members. But just like firms, different members within the union may have different individual goals. So if we zoom in and we're looking at all the different individuals within that union, there could be a lot of difference of opinions of what they should do, of what their goals should be. There could even be infighting among the members, tons of little different things going on. But when we zoom out, we can see the organization acting as if they have a singular goal in mind, almost like it's one individual. We have to be careful in our analysis, but just like we did with firms earlier in the semester in this course, we can do the same thing here with unions if we're careful. So in general, we can say that unions want to maximize the well-being of their members. Now, what well-being actually looks like in practice can differ, and that depends partially on institutional context. So things like government regulations, business goals, even cultural norms can shape what the members' interest really is. So, for instance, workers within the union could want higher salaries. That could be their main goal. Maybe they just want stable working hours or shorter working hours. Instead of working 60 hours a week, they want to work 40 hours a week. Or it could be guarantees of employment. They don't want to be fired and rehired at a whim. They want something consistent. The list can go on. There's a lot of different things that they could want, although typically what we look at is wages. Now, unions struggle to exist in environments where there are no profits or no long-term profits. Think of it this way. It's difficult to bargain for higher wages if firms can barely stay afloat. So unions do introduce the sort of extra cost for firms, even if it's just negotiating with unions. Things like that are easier to do when times are better than when money's tight. Your textbook considers unions, and they use this sort of like a metaphor as a way for workers to capture some of the rents or some of the excess profits above what equilibrium would suggest. So when firms earn these rents, these higher profits, it's a way for unions to kind of capture some of that. Some of the best examples and most high-profile examples of unions doing this is when you see the pro sports unions, when the NFL or the NBA, MLB, when they're negotiating these new contracts, because suddenly the say the NBA they get a new TV deal that's worth even more money for them. So the teams are bringing in more money, the league's bringing in more money. The players want some of that, and that's kind of the metaphor that the textbook uses for unionization. Now, I'll save you from having to go through too much of a history lesson. It is important to read through the textbook at least once just to get a kind of an idea of what unionization has been like, but that's not super important for what we're doing here. Um, just looking at the long-term trends here, unionization started to grow in the first half of the 20th century and ends up peaking in about the late 40s, going through the 50s. But then over time, we see a slow decline as manufacturing employment starts to fall, so too does union membership. Meanwhile, membership in public sector unions are strong today. They were legalized by an executive order by Kennedy and then enshrined into law, made permanent in the late 1970s. So we see quite high public sector union membership today. So prior to the Great Depression, the public did not have a particularly favorable opinion on labor unions. Um, a lot of the early labor union like sort of movements had sort of like a violent or militaristic attitude towards them. There were a lot of issues, um, well, frankly, on both sides, some of the firms trying to defend themselves from original unionization, and then the unions themselves being, or groups of workers who wanted to unionize being willing to resort to violence. And in like Pittsburgh, Western PA, all throughout the general Rust Belt, there were violent skirmishes going on. And a lot of times the public tended to blame the unions for that. Employers used what they called yellow dog contracts. Basically, that they would hire someone, but say, if you want to get a job, you have to agree that you will not join a union to protect them. Um, Under the New Deal in the 30s, the federal government policy tended to shift from more negative to more positive towards the union. And they started to enshrine collective bargaining and unionization as an important way to protect workers. And we see there's four major public laws that your textbook goes into a little bit more detail on, passed through the 30s, 40s, and into the 50s. Now, the way union membership works can be thought of as a pyramid, and that's how your textbook describes it. They place the AFL-CIO at the top of the pyramid. The AFL-CIO is the national organization representing most of the unions in the country. They say like 80% of union members fall under the AFL-CIO umbrella. Now, most of the unions under that umbrella are national unions, and they'll represent either a single profession or several related professions in the same industry. Those national unions are typically composed of what we call locals. So they're established at either the city level or in big cities are often done at the plant level. Now, individual unions, either at the national level or at the local level, can choose to engage in negotiations, or they can, even strike or go. Um, they have the ability to decide to take like all of the potential actions. Now, the benefit of being under the AFL-CIO umbrella is that the national organization can coordinate between different related unions, and they can use their purse, the money they get from the union membership, to lobby politicians and to support those unions in their negotiations.